We often view light as symbolic, a protection from the unknown and a waypoint to safety. We become attracted to the light as it calls us closer and closer into its shining embrace. To those navigating the sweeping waves of Michigan's Great Lakes, the glow of a lighthouse meant a respite from their unrest. But what comes after there is no light left and only shadow? Today, we explore 3 dark stories of lighthouses in the Great Lakes state. A now crumbling beacon for lost souls that sits alone in the waters overlooking Mackinac City is the Waugoshance Shoal Light. Waugoshance has been the location of which at least 2 of its former keepers have lost their lives, and possibly even a third unconfirmed death during its construction in 1852. The light's most infamous story comes from the tale of keeper John Herman. 41-year-old Herman was never one to take his work too seriously and earned a reputation as both of a prankster as well as a drunk. One cold October night in 1900, Herman was returning to the lighthouse after an all-day bender in Mackinac City. Upon his return with a belly full of alcohol and a little friendly desire to stir up some fun, Herman hatched a plan to lock up his assistant keeper in the lamp room. Satisfied with this prank, he stumbled away in a drunken stupor, laughing off into the distance. When the assistant had finally managed to escape the tower, he began furiously searching for John Herman to scold him for his childish and drunken antics. The feelings of anger swelling up inside the assistant, though, slowly began to turn to concern and dread. Herman was nowhere to be found, and after a brief search, authorities found there was nothing that could be done. John Herman was gone. Weeks passed at Waugoshance. Herman's absence would go on to be filled, and work at the lighthouse returned to business as usual. Keepers found themselves nodding off in a daze, and occasionally returned to thinking about his disappearance. Becoming unfocused and oftentimes mindlessly droning through work, the keepers would overlook minor details at the lighthouse until they became blindingly clear. Tools would appear out of place, coal buckets would become filled without being attended to, and keepers who found themselves drifting off to sleep on the job would be awoken to their chair being kicked out from underneath them. Eventually, all the unexplained happenings began to scare off the keepers, to the point where they could no longer keep the light adequately staffed. The lighthouse began to decay from erosion and neglect and was abandoned for construction of a new lighthouse somewhere nearby. The light now once again belonged to the mischievous soul that continues to haunt it. The old white lighthouse at Point Iroquois, just outside Brimley, Michigan, appears clean, charming, and well kept enough, but harbors within it a wealth of dark histories. Visitors to the light have reported multiple different sightings of ghosts, unexplained paranormal occurrences, and eerie feelings of distress. The shoreline bordering Point Iroquois began its dark history as the site of a gruesome Native American massacre taking place in 1662, centuries before its construction. A fierce battle raged between the Iroquois and Ojibwe tribes, ending with the slaughter of many Iroquois braves. In 1919, the SS Myron gave way to a November storm that claimed the lives of all 17 crew members aboard. Ghostly silhouettes of these Native American warriors and seamen have been reported to walk the foggy grounds below the lighthouse, pacing around the shores. The final apparition reported to walk among the light is the ghost of a young girl often referred to as the little girl of Point Iroquois. Her story is tied to the death of a 3-year-old girl who was attacked and killed by a bear in the nearby woods in the summer of 1948. The bear was eventually tracked down and killed by a mob of angry townsfolk. They'd confirmed it was in fact the same bear by cutting it open and finding fragments of the missing girl inside. The young girl's ghost has been claimed to be seen wandering the lighthouse grounds by a handful of residents and visitors, with some even experiencing abnormally cold spots within the lighthouse itself. Neighboring the shores north of Point Iroquois lies Whitefish Point Light Station, a place sharing an equally dark past. The most notable incident is the infamous sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald in 1975, about 15 miles from Whitefish Point. Under an unyielding assault from a great storm, the ship would be pulled to the depths of Lake Superior, making it the resting place of all 29 members on board. The area later became known as Shipwreck Alley and Graveyard of the Great Lakes. Many paranormal skeptics traveling to the shores during stormy seasons have reported hearing wailing in the wind, and even sightings of ghost ships far into the distance. The tale of the Big Bay Point Lighthouse begins and tragically ends with its inaugural keeper, William Pryor. Much unlike keeper John Herman mentioned in the previous story, Pryor was a highly motivated and extremely hard-working man, and managed the Big Bay Point Lighthouse with an iron fist. He would often log in scathing detail even the slightest of troubles he'd experienced attempting to coexist with his assistant keepers, almost always viewing them to be lazy and weak. After his first assistant was dismissed for relocation, Pryor expressed great joy and gratitude for someone to come that would be more to his own liking. Within less than a year, he sent his second assistant packing, citing constant concerns of the keeper's work and duty coming second to family. In his final log on this assistant, Pryor was quoted saying, "He is without exception the most ungrateful and the meanest man I have ever met." William Pryor was very much an ornery and demanding man, but would soon be rewarded with a worthy assistant in his 19-year-old son, George Edward. The father and son would continue to work alongside each other for about 15 months until tragedy struck in April of 1901. While working on the pier, George suffered a fall onto the concrete below, gnashing a deep wound and cutting his shin to the bone. Already well aware of his father's stubbornness and quick temper, he continued pressing on with the duties tasked for him through immense pain. Gangrenous sores began to consume George's flesh in the weeks after the accident, before ultimately taking his life later that June. William Pryor's once extensive work logs dwindled shorter and shorter as he spiraled into depression at the loss of his boy. Only 2 weeks after George's death, it is reported that William was last seen wandering into the woods nearby, carrying a gun and a container of cyanide. No trace of him would be found until the following November, when a passerby spotted human remains in the woods about a half-mile from Big Bay Point. Around the discovered skeleton's fleshless neck was a rope, most likely making it a victim of a suicide. The remains were ruled to be William Pryor's due to the small tufts of red hair and decomposed uniform material nearby. Now, it's absolutely fair to conclude that Pryor took his own life, but the method of which he chose remains a bit of a mystery, as witnesses never saw Pryor carrying rope. Was this all premeditated? Where did this rope come from? What really happened in those woods? In days after his death, investigators noted that Pryor may have been experiencing bouts of insanity and ultimately wandered off in one of these fits. Whatever happened that day, it seems likely that William Pryor was never meant to return to his post at Big Bay Point.